So today we are going to be actually kind of talking through the data structure, the hard part of the beginning of any like little side project or anything that you have in your brain. Um, and as I've been thinking through these little side projects that I've had, or as I've had the time to actually sit down and think about them, I I started looking into some technologies and stuff that have been okay. Hello, cat. Yes, hi. Um, some technologies that will help uh, us to, or at least me as a front end developer, to be able to kind of like jumpstart that data structure process and get it written, get it kind of like partially set up, even so that I can start actually doing the things that I'm a good at and b enjoy the most, making things look cool, having those cool interactions, and all of that type of stuff. So this beginning part of any like web app project is something that I've struggled with myself for a little while. So in any case, looked at a few things. The back I don't know, probably like a year and a half ago or something like that, maybe a little longer than that even. Wes Boss came out with his advanced React course, which did a phenomenal job. I mean, all of Wes's course are absolutely amazing. He does a great job teaching anything, any subject. He just has a really good way of explaining stuff. But he came out with his advanced React course that had, it was a pretty much a full stack web app that he steps through and explains all the different pieces and how they connect and all of that type of stuff. And that's where I kind of had my first exposure to setting up this type of data structure, or any data structure, really. I mean, most of my experience comes from WordPress, which the data structure is set up by WordPress, and then you just kind of hook into things and change it a little bit here and there. But you don't actually go through the process of figuring out how the data structure is going to exist in the first place. So, Wes's course was kind of my first exposure to that, and within that course, he used Next on the front end, React obviously paired with Next, and then he used a few GraphQL Yoga, which is kind of like a middleware for interpreting data between the front end and the back end, and then Prisma as the actual data store. So that was my first exposure to Prisma, and quite honestly, like I did his course and it made sense while I was stepping through stuff as Wes was explaining things on his video. Um, but then admittedly, I kind of like took I finished the course. It was helpful. I had some of that information, stick in my brain. And then several months later, I tried to kind of take that knowledge and apply it to this side project thing that I've had in my head forever. And it just did not click at all with me. For whatever reason, the initial, and this was Prisma 1, so the initial iteration of Prisma. What we're going to be talking about today is Prisma 2. But with Prisma 1, I, for whatever reason, just couldn't grasp like the mutations and the really what it was the relations between like data types, right? So Prisma is essentially it's a way to store data, but they have a like a query language. So Prisma and GraphQL play together super well. So if you want to use GraphQL, Prisma is a good thing that sits kind of on top of your like MySQL database and allows you to query that MySQL database using GraphQL queries. GraphQL from a front end development standpoint makes a lot of sense to me because it's super declarative. It's like, okay, I'm gonna get all I want from the blog posts are the ID, the title, and the slug or something like that. I want to only query for those things, and when I run that query, I want to just have those items returned. So I really want to grasp and understand how to use GraphQL along with whatever data structure I end up choosing. And what's nice about Prisma sitting on top of that SQL database is, working with WordPress and stuff like that over the years, like 10 years ago, I was running SQL queries to just do things. So I at least have, a decent grasp on the syntax and stuff for like a SQL database. So that's kind of the background. I'm not sure how interesting that is to anyone, but that's kind of the background of like where this desire to actually look into data structures and stuff kind of came from. I really want to be able to, this is like a personal thing, but like I want to be able to have enough, full stack knowledge to be able to do something like this on my own, at least initially, develop a small little like side project from beginning to end, and then, bring in people smarter than me to like help me build on it if it's interesting to them too. But I want to have something at least a little bit like concrete before I start being like, hey, come help me with this thing that I have an idea for, but I don't have really fleshed out at all, and I need you to do all the back end work, so please help me. I don't want to do that necessarily. So yeah, and then a month or so ago, I kind of started looking into this again because we've had a lot of time on our hands, and I kind of went back to trying to use Prisma, but I ended up using the legacy version of Prisma initially, and then eventually finding out that Prisma 2 had come out, and they made a lot of like really, really big changes to Prisma and how it interacts with your SQL database, how you interact with it on the front end, and all of that type of stuff. So I was super interested to see how it played out, and here we are. Today we're gonna kind of walk through just setting up a small little Hello World project. We're gonna run through some of the documentation and stuff from Prisma just to kind of set up a project and understand at the very base level like how to work with Prisma, which is cool. And the stuff that I've done in the past month or so, it is much more friendly to my dumb front-end developer brain. Like GraphQL relations between like data models was, for whatever reason, the most confusing thing in the world to me. I could not, for the life of me, figure out how to associate two like records together and have them kind of be like like many to many relationships and stuff like that. The SQL like terms for those types of relationships, like one to many, many to one, and then many to many relationships are things that I know exist, but even with SQL, I don't really understand how that works, which is why I'm a front-end developer and not someone who works with data all the time. Thank goodness. So, yeah, let's just kind of dive in to Prisma a little bit here and start up a project, and yeah, we'll go from there. I'm going to, real quick before I show my screen here, I'm just going to set up a new repository for a Prisma 2 starter so that I can drop this repository into the description so that you can look around if you would like. Cool. Okay, so we've got GitHub repo. All right, cool. Let me close out of all of this and then switch over to here. Excellent. Let me blow up this text before I forget a little bit so that I'm not writing super tiny and no one can see it. Excellent. Cool. I think we're in good shape here. Okay, cool. So I have a just a little mostly empty folder that I created on my local machine here. I have this final folder in here only because I ran through this earlier today so that I didn't like screw anything up or forget anything, or because I'm on a Windows machine. Every single time I try and do a stream, something stupid happens with WSL, trying to use Linux on a Windows. That is something I have to, it's a burden I have to bear because I've chosen to do this on a Windows machine. So anyway, I'm sure everyone has an opinion about that, but we're going to move on before anyone can yell at me about it. Okay, cool, great. So we have an empty folder here for all intents and purposes. I have an empty GitHub repository that I've set up here for the Prisma 2 starter. Let me go ahead and just add the remote here. I need to initialize that, and then I should be able to do that. And now we can git push u origin master just to make sure that everything is fine. Oh, and naturally I didn't like ignore any of the node modules or anything like that because I am silly. I'm going to touch a git ignore, and then I need to let me grab a git ignore from another project real quick just to make sure I got everything. Just gonna grab a whole bunch of stuff. And ignore it. Git ignore. Let's see how well that works. It still seems like it's writing a whole bunch of objects, so maybe it's not ignoring the node modules within my final folder. Maybe, maybe not. We'll see, I guess, when I refresh this and go to final. And it did not ignore my node modules. That's okay. I think it needs to be *** node modules to actually ignore those. In any case, I'm not going to worry about that too much right now. Okay. Anyway, cool. So we have a Git repository set up here. And we can get started. Okay, cool. So once I actually clean this up a little bit, I'll paste the link and share this with everyone. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're just going to set up a Prisma project. Prisma is, like I mentioned before, it's a data handling solution that works really well with React and GraphQL. It sits on top of your SQL database wherever it lives. They have examples. Their documentation is great. They have examples for like if you host your database on like AWS or something like that, or if you use a local SQL database manager like Postgres, which is what we're going to be using. It makes it super easy to kind of work with your data. it's a they describe themselves as a type safe query builder, which I kind of interpret like much like TypeScript. It's very declarative and strict in the way that the queries and everything are written, which is generally a good thing. I mean, if you're working on a large team of people and you have a super complicated app, you want to take out as much of the guesswork as possible for how to write something, how to associate data, how to define stuff. So because of that strict kind of nature of their like query language, they a lot of the tooling kind of down the chain that ends up getting paired with Prisma uses TypeScript. So some of the stuff that we're going to be working on involves TypeScript, which is just a very strict way of writing JavaScript, more or less. I know almost nothing about TypeScript. This is legitimately like the first experience that I've had with it. So I'm sure as I screw things up or like don't properly define data and stuff like that within these TypeScript files, someone will yell at me and help me understand how to properly like write this data. So just bear with me kind of as I go through that a little bit too. So yeah, that's Prisma. The syntax is strict, good for working in large development teams. There are very few ways to do things like correctly in Prisma, which is good because, like I said, you're not going to waste a whole lot of time like thinking about the naming conventions for things. Although you're starting a data structure from scratch, so there's going to be a lot of like initial thinking about what your table names and associations and all of that type of stuff need to be called. But beyond that, actually writing queries and stuff like that, there's very little guesswork to it, which is great. So we'll be touching a little bit of TypeScript here and there as well. So I think that with that, we'll just kind of get started actually setting this up. So this is the Prisma site. It's just prisma.io. The homepage just kind of explains that, explains how Prisma kind of works with your database. Prisma makes database access easy with an auto-generated and type-safe query builder that's tailored to your database schema. It provides an alternative to traditional ORMs and SQL query builders. You start with a new database, and one of those super cool things that Prisma does is this introspect function, which we'll explore here in a little bit. But Prisma can essentially take your SQL database tables and introspect and like build a GraphQL schema around it just based on your SQL database. So you don't have to go in and manually write the different associations or like the different queries if you're trying to get multiple posts or multiple users, or if you're trying to create, it does a lot of like the CRUD stuff, the create, read, update, and destroy stuff just for you, which is great. So it saves you a good amount of time through this introspect method, which will it's one of those things you run with npx. We'll get into that a little bit. So this little graph that they have here on their homepage is kind of like helpful for visualizing where Prisma sits within your project, more or less. And like I said, so Prisma's down here in the middle. It sits on top of your database. Your database is just a SQL database that you set up. The Prisma client sits on top of it, is able to communicate with, the front end kind of node portion of your application, and then pass data to it from your database through GraphQL and stuff like that. So, it's pretty cool. They have some example projects that you can look through, examples using things like Next, which is what I'm probably going to try and continue this exploration with, and then kind of go from there. So The homepage has some like exploration stuff. If you want to use TypeScript or plain JavaScript, they've got options for that as well. But what I am going to click into are the docs. And then over here on the left-hand side, they have this set up Prisma and start from scratch option. This is what I'm going to use to kind of build out our little like Hello World application. Their example goes through and sets up tables and stuff for a blog. So you set up a user who has a profile, and a user can also have posts. And then we'll kind of like adjust some data and do some stuff through that. But just a nice simple example that it can be extrapolated to almost any data structure that you can imagine, right? So this is just a good way to get the basics of interacting with Prisma down. And then eventually we're going to look into how to actually use this data on the front end of an application. When we start, we're essentially going to be using a node server that just in the console is going to return stuff to us. So nothing's actually going to get output into the browser. It's just mostly JavaScript or TypeScript that we're going to write that outputs stuff in the console so that we can see it's working. So yeah, that's where we will start. So the first thing that we need to do before we actually dive into any of the code is install Postgres. So if we click on this link here in their documentation, they have this whole prerequisites section. In order to successfully complete this guide, we're going to need Node.js installed on your machine, which we've worked with Gatsby in the past and stuff. And if you're a developer watching this, I assume that you have Node.js installed on your computer. If not, you just click on this link and install the latest version of Node. And you should be good to go. With Postgres, it's essentially a GUI for interacting with your SQL databases that are hosted on your machine. It's all just local. It doesn't connect to the cloud or like AWS or anything like that. That's something that I have yet to figure out because I have not launched any applications like this before. So everything I'm doing is just on my local machine. It's not really anywhere yet. So I'm sure down the line we'll explore that. In any case, you just go to Postgres, download your version of it, and run through the setup wizard and everything. I have it installed already, and all I need to do is just the application when it actually ends up getting installed is called pgadmin. This is the GUI. So once I start it, it starts up this little elephant guy on my local machine. And if I right click on it here, if that window didn't open, you can open a new PG4 admin window from here. It's got like configuration options and stuff like that. I'm just realizing now that you can't see that because that's off my screen, but it's just that little elephant icon that you saw here. So once you start that up, it should just open a local host browser pointed to a specific port. It took me a little bit to figure out like how to actually navigate this a little bit, but within servers, you can have apparently multiple server groups on your machine, which it would probably make sense if I like separated this out into like Twitch stream and like actual projects and stuff so that I don't mix the two up. In any case, each server group has a Postgres SQL group here, I guess, and then within that, it's got a database group and then a group for like login, like users and stuff like that. So within this database group is where you will be doing most of the work. It comes with this initial like Postgres database here, just as an example. And yeah, that's more or less the gist of this whole thing. What we're going to do eventually is create a new database, but I will wait until we actually get to that step to do it. So we have Postgres installed. The pSQL command, I don't have this on my local machine. I just run these SQL queries through Postgres, and I'll show you how to do that eventually, but you can get the pSQL command line client for Postgres, presumably just by filling this out. I imagine some sort of, yeah, you know, I have no idea how to set that up because I haven't done it myself. So yeah, if you want the command line feature for it, I guess you'll kind of have to figure out how to do that because I don't use it. So lots of ways to do different things. This pSQL command, I think, is just a way of running like SQL queries through the command line. So if you have a like SQL file in your folder structure, you can just tell pSQL, hey, run these SQL queries and, you know, insert them into this database or create these tables or whatever. Cool. So with that, I think we can start setting up our project. So first thing we're going to do is install some Npm packages. All of this is done through Npm Packages, and then we run npx for a few different functions. We already have our project folder created. So after we've made our project folder, we can just move on to the next step, I guess. So first step is to initialize an Npm project. And that -y flag just accepts everything automatically. It doesn't prompt you for anything after running npm init. And all that does is just write out a blank package.json file. I'm going to reduce that font size just a little bit so that we can do that. Yeah, creates a blank package.json, fills out most of this stuff. If you're creating a real application, you'd want to make sure that this package.json is filled out correctly, has some tests, all of that type of stuff. Cool. So we'll just keep moving on. And then from there, we're going to install a few specific npm packages. So we'll do npm install Prisma CLI. I'm doing this the painful way and not just copying and pasting it. Typescript, TS node. That TS node package is the Typescript node server that we're going to end up running commands through to actually get data back from within the console. This @types node is a TypeScript package for node, and then save this all in dev, save dev. So we've got Prisma CLI, TypeScript, TS node, types node, save dev. I think we should be good there. Would help if I spelled things correctly. Types node. There we go. Excellent. Cool. So nice and quick, only 11 packages to get started, which is good. Anymore, if you try and start any project like a React project and stuff, I mean, this is obviously going to grow a whole bunch as we actually build out the application and stuff. But like seeing only 11 packages added instead of 347 like you would with some other boilerplate thing is pretty nice. So that's cool. Cool. So this creates that package.json. Now that we've installed a few packages, we have our dev dependencies here. These should all be the latest versions. You can see the Prisma CLI is still in beta. It seems pretty stable. I, again, haven't launched anything to production with this, but we'll see how that progresses as I get further into my project. But yeah, just something to keep in mind. But it's worked pretty flawlessly for me so far, and I've worked with it a pretty decent amount. So I think it's fairly safe to use, but we'll find out, I guess. Cool. So we've got our package.json created. Now for the TypeScript stuff, we need to create a TypeScript config file, and then add some configuration stuff to it. So we're going to touch a tsconfig.json file. And then within here, we'll write out a few things. We've got compiler options, source map set to true. The output directory is just going to be dist, which is fine. You can name that whatever you want for your project. Strict is going to be set to true. I think if you set strict to false, it kind of like doesn't kind of like defeat the purpose of TypeScript being strict. I guess instead of like not compiling things, it'll just throw warnings instead of full-blown like fatal errors that just don't allow you to compile anymore. So in any case, strict is set to true. Lib is going to be set to ES next. Based on my like type ahead, I wonder if there's any actual difference between the capitalization of these two things. I'll just go with the type ahead suggestion. And then ES module interop. I honestly have no idea what that actually does. If someone does, please let me know so that I know what I'm talking about here. What is ES module interop? Emit import star and import default helpers for runtime Babel ecosystem compatibility and allow synthetic default imports for type system compatibility. That is not at all helpful. I'm not sure what that means. In any case, it seems like that is just something that we need in order for this TypeScript project to work the way that we want it to. So we will just move on and explore that later. Cool. So we've got all of the TypeScript config set up in there. Saved that. Should be good to move on. Now we can invoke the Prisma CLI by prefixing it with npx. So because we have the Prisma CLI in our local project, we should be able to npx Prisma. Okay. See, this is what I'm talking about. Every single time I try and do something on a stream, I get weird NPM errors and stuff like that. Not found. Prisma not found. Prisma latest is not in the NPM registry. Did I npx Primsa? I'm struggling, man, with the spelling apparently. Prisma. Hey, excellent. Oh my goodness. Okay, good. It's just me. It's not the system, the machine. It's not the Windows. It's just me. That's good. Okay, cool. So we ran npx Prisma. They've got this little explanation. Migrate and model your database. You can run Prisma commands. Got it. Cool. Init, introspect to generate. So these are, there's not a whole lot to the Prisma CLI. It just does things to initialize the project, to do that cool like introspecting thing that we talked about a little bit earlier. And then this generate piece actually generates I think that the TypeScript definitions that Prisma uses to do like queries and stuff like that. So we'll explore that a little bit further as well. There's some experimental flags and stuff like that, there's actually a command that we'll run later that uses this. And then there's just some example commands that we can run here, which we can ignore for now. So cool. So npx Prisma, initialize the Prisma CLI, and that's all good. Next, set up your Prisma project by creating your Prisma schema file with the following command. All we need to do is npx Prisma init. Cool, so that created this Prisma folder, which has a couple of files that we'll walk through here in a second. This initialized our schema.prisma file, which we will use to actually start defining some of our schema. And this, I believe that this ends up getting updated as we introspect things from the database. So I don't think there's anything that we really need to edit in here right now, but we'll move forward with the next steps. So from here, we can set the provider of the data source block in schema.prisma to match your database, whether it's Postgres, MySQL, or SQLite. Set the database URL in the .env file to point to your existing database. Okay, cool. So now we have this schema file that is referencing this .env file that was automatically generated by Prisma. What's up, Delster? How's it going, man? We are just exploring some Prisma, working with data structures today. So we're building the initial kind of data source for an application. So yeah, we're gonna be looking into a little bit of GraphQL, and like just creating and updating just some basic data through Prisma. So that's kind of where we're at. We're just setting the stuff up right now, trying to get Prisma to talk to our Postgres database. So that's the step that we're on right now. We need to actually create a Postgres database, I believe. So in our PG admin, I'm going to create a new database here. I just right click on, I've used this very little. So this is the only way that I know how to create a database, but right clicking on databases, hovering over create, and then selecting database will give you this little pop-up. And we will just call this Twitch blog. And then we can set the owner to any of these like users and stuff that we created. I created a specific like stream user, so that we can, so that just to separate concerns a little bit here. Cool. So we've got that. You can set the encoding here. I just leave all of this default. Delster, like I'm a front end dev, so I don't know the proper ways to do some of the things. I'm not sure if maybe you're a back end dev or if you've done this a whole bunch, but like I just leave things default because I don't know what a lot of this does for the most part. So yeah, we're just gonna kind of go with that. Create this database, set the Twitch user to the owner, and call it good. We'll save that, and it should run and create the database for us. Excellent. Cool. So this is just an alphabetical order. Twitch blog is all the way at the bottom. Within here, this is one of the things about Postgres that I'm not sure necessarily what a lot of these things are. Casts, catalogs, event triggers, stuff like that. I imagine these are all just like fancy ways of interacting with a SQL database that Postgres exposes to you. But what we are going to concern ourselves with is in the schemas drop down here, and then the tables drop down, which right now is empty because we haven't added any tables to it. So this is where most of my experience with Postgres exists, is right here within this, just within this tables selection here. Cool. So let's go ahead and connect our database to Prisma. Within this .env file is where we're going to do that. And if we look at the docs here, they've got a whole section on connect your database. So to connect your database, you need to set the URL field on the data source block in your Prisma schema to your database connection URL. This is just done by default. It just leverages the .env file. So when you push this up to production, don't expose any like passwords and stuff through just normal files and stuff. So this env file gets hidden, shouldn't be included in any version control like Git or anything like that. That's why we ignored it up here in the Git ignore. So we will leverage this env file to actually write this out. So in this case, the URL is set via the environment variable like we just talked about. Now we'll adjust the connection URL. So because we're using Postgres, this is already set up for us here. I'm not sure how, and like MySQL or SQLite, I believe that the connection would just be like my SQL : / or SQLite, depending on what you're using. But because we're using Postgres, that's our prefix there. And then from here, we've got user, password, host, port. So the user is going to be that Twitch user that I had set up. The password for this is super generic. So there you go. Then we've got host, which is just going to be localhost. The port, which is the same port, I believe. No, that. Interesting. Yeah, I'm just going to trust that that is correct. And then the database name here. Database, yep, schema public. I assume that's fine. So our database name is twitch_blog. Cool, so we'll save that. User, password, port. The port where your database server is running. Typically 54324 Postgres. Okay, so that's just a default port that Postgres runs on. So cool, we can leave that. We've got the database name and then the schema. If you're unsure what to provide for the schema, which I certainly am, for a Postgres and SQL connection URL, you can probably omit it. In that case, this default schema name public will be used. Excellent, cool. Sweet, so that is super easy. When running Postgres locally on Mac, your user and password as well as the database name typically correspond to the current user on your OS. Something to keep in mind there. Cool, okay. So now we should be in good shape to, so we've got the connection from Prisma, from our app to the database. Now we need to create some database tables. So from here, we are going to create a new file called schema.sql and add this stuff to it. So let's just close that folder out, create a new file and call it schema.sql. And I'm going to do this the painful way and type this out myself. Anytime I follow a tutorial or any documentation or anything like this for my own like muscle memory and my own brain, typing this stuff out manually instead of copying and pasting things helps me to retain that information a little bit more. And also these are just SQL queries, so it kind of helps me remember how to write SQL queries like I did, 10 years ago or whatever it was. So we'll just kind of do it that way. So bear with me as I type this stuff out. So I remember SQL being very annoying because everything is capital until you capitalized until you need to actually define your tables and stuff. It's very annoying. So create table public user. So this is going to create a public user table that we're going to set some stuff to. So we're going to leverage an ID, serial primary key cannot be null. So this ID is required. Name is just a string, varchar 255, email varchar 255, and this one is unique and cannot be null. So this is just a basic table with a few rows in it that are associated with the user. Pretty straightforward. Create another table, public, and we'll call this one post. So this is creating the post table. Again, it's going to have an ID, serial primary key not null. Each post is going to have a title. That is also a string. Not null. Do a created at. I keep hitting my caps lock. Created at, there we go. And this is just going to be a date time or timestamp. Null default to the time that the default now. Okay, cool. So as soon as we create a an item within this table, it's just going to grab the current date time and drop it into this row. So that's cool. Content is just a bunch of text. Whether or not the post is published. It's just a Boolean. Cannot be null. And it defaults to false. So, yeah, I mean, this just for context for my own brain too, like WordPress. Until you hit the publish button, everything is just a draft. This kind of works the same way. So it's defaulting the publish status to false. And then this is where like relationships and connections between the data kind of happen. So the author ID is the ID of the user who published this post. So the ID of the author. It exists as a row within this post table, and then you assign a foreign key of author ID, which is the name of the row in this table. So we're defining a foreign key of author ID, and we tell it that this key references the public user. And then the specific row within that table. So we're saying this author ID key references our user ID. So that creates the connection between these two pieces of data. Cool. And then a semicolon. And then one more table. So we're going to create table public profile. And set this ID, serial, primary, key, not null. There's a biography, text, the user ID. So this is another relationship that we're going to create. It's just another integer, has to be unique and cannot be null. And then we set this as the foreign key. User ID, and then tell it that this references the public user ID. So you can see these relationships can exist in multiple different tables, right? So the post references this user ID and the profile references this user ID to both create unique instances of the table. Cool. So we've got that set up. Go ahead and save that. I think we should be in good shape here. Okay, so note some fields are written in double quotes to ensure that Postgres uses proper casing. If no double quotes are used, Postgres would just read everything as lowercase characters. Interesting. So these double quotes are necessary for things like user ID, I guess. Created at. Interesting. Okay. Good to know. So we've got that saved. You can create the tables using any Postgres SQL client of your choice. If you're using pSQL, you can now create the tables using the following command. So this is the part where I am weird and just have a manual way of doing this. So more or less the schema.sql file is just a reference for you, for me right now, because I'm not running the pSQL command, is just a reference for me, or like a place to save my SQL queries, so that when I go into my database, there's this query tool button up at the top left here, and it opens up a new just query editor that I can copy and paste this into and then hit play. This is the risk you run when you don't copy and paste things, is syntax errors. I forgot a couple commas. comma, 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 comma. That's all good. Name, email. Okay, I think that should be good. Let's try this one more time. Here we go. Awesome. And if we, oops, not the Grant Wizard. If we refresh these tables, we should now have a few tables: post, profile, user. Now, if we go into these and look at the actual properties, let me blow that out just a little bit and move that. If we look, name, OID owner, this doesn't show the there you go. You can look at the columns this way. ID, title, created at, this is for the post, so you can kind of see all of the bits that we wrote in our SQL file here exist within the table as columns. Great. Sweet. Okay, so that query worked, which is lovely. We'll go back to the documentation here. So the psql command does essentially that same thing without you having to manually open the query tool like I do. So either way, there's examples for psql and the manual way to do it like me. Cool. So now we created these 3 tables in our database. This is the graphical representation, pretty much what we just looked at in that columns view. All of our data is set up, ready to have stuff actually inserted into it. So this is this next part is the cool part that Prisma has. This introspect method is pretty rad. So we can look, if we look at their little table here, once we run this npx prisma introspect command, it goes into your database. It looks at the tables that you have created through either psql or our manual method. It understands pretty much all the relations, the types of columns and stuff that you have, whether it's an ID or if it has to be unique or if it has an association or a relationship, all of that type of stuff. And then it returns that database schema to the Prisma CLI, and then it actually updates and writes a file for the schema. So that's where within this schema.prisma file in our project, this is where that stuff will get written. So let's go ahead and run that. And this is the thing that is super helpful to me as like a front end person who is dumb at back end stuff. You can see here, it just straight up updated our Prisma schema file with the like GraphQL or the Prisma SDL, their markup language. Created the post model. It has all the definitions for things that we specified in the SQL. It has the created at now flag that we had in there. It's got some like auto increment stuff for IDs. So as you create posts, the ID just goes one after the other. So you don't have to think about that. It creates the associations. So you can see here that we have a user associated to this user model, and it writes out the relation, telling Prisma that our author ID field here is the relation field that we're referencing to the user, which corresponds to the ID in that user model. So this Prisma introspect method is a large part of the reason why I kind of have chose to use Prisma for this project. It does a lot of the heavy lifting that my front end brain was struggling with doing in the past. So that's pretty cool. I found that super interesting myself. So cool. So after that, the data model is now created. It looks as follows. Note that the fields on the models have been reordered for better readability. Makes sense. So yeah, what we have in here exactly matches what they have in the docs there. Prisma's data model is a declarative representation of your database's schema and serves as the foundation for the generated Prisma Client library. Your Prisma Client instance will expose queries that are tailored to these models. So we got a few minor issues with the data model. The user relation field is uppercase and therefore doesn't adhere to Prisma's naming conventions. This is one thing that was kind of interesting to me. This file gets generated. The potentially annoying thing is, as we'll see here, I'll just keep reading and then you can you'll see the annoying part. To express more semantics, it'd also be nice if the field was called author instead of user to describe the relationship between the user and the post. The post and profile relation fields, as well as the user relation fields on profile, are all uppercase. So we need to adhere to Prisma's naming conventions. Both fields should be lowercase. So all of the stuff on the left-hand side here within these defined models apparently should be lowercase. I imagine this introspection piece, it's just an artifact of this introspection piece because it directly takes the like the table names and stuff and applies them to these relations. So you do need to do a little bit of manual work, but you at least don't have to like decipher all of this for yourself and write it out manually. Going in here and lowercasing a few things is much easier than trying to figure out how to properly write these models yourself. So that trade-off is fine to me. So even after lowercasing the post on the field on user, it's still slightly misnamed. That's because it actually refers to a list of posts. A better name for this would be the plural posts. So all of these changes we can just make in this file because this file is then used to, this file is referenced by other parts of Prisma. So because these relation fields are virtual, meaning that they don't directly manifest in the database, you can manually rename them and then save them without it affecting the database or the tables or anything like that. So within here, we will just go ahead and do that. So changing user on the post to author, making sure it's lowercase, changing the user on the profile to the lowercase version, user. And then making sure that's lined up. And then on user, we have plural of posts that we need. So posts and then lowercasing profile. And then making sure that everything is lined up. Looks good. And then save that. So not terribly annoying. The only thing is like as I have been working on my other project using this, it's been a little bit annoying as I kind of like test out the data structure and like move things around and change the name of things and that type of stuff. Regenerating this schema file and then having to go through and lowercase everything, change it to plural, adjust this to be like author and stuff like that gets a little bit tedious and annoying. But again, it's a trade-off between having to write this all manually every single time. So yeah, that's just kind of where my head is at. I'll accept that annoying part if it does this hard part for me. So cool. So we can move on. So we've got our schema. We have our database set up with just some generic blog post type of data. Obviously there's no actual data within these tables. We've just kind of set up the structure of everything first, which is cool. So in this example, the database schema did follow the naming conventions for the Prisma models. Only the virtual relation fields that were generated from introspection did not adhere to them and needed adjustment. This optimizes the ergonomics of the generated Prisma Client API. Yeah, cool. That makes sense to me. Okay, cool. So now we need to install and generate the Prisma Client. Let's see. I see. Okay, yeah. The Prisma Client is where our like Typescript definitions and stuff end up living. It references this schema file and generates a whole like definition list of like various queries, mutations, like creating, updating, all of that. The whole CRUD portion of this is helped along by the Prisma client. So we'll go ahead and install that. Npm install Prisma Client. And the way that they explain this too is kind of interesting. This node module is a bit different from conventional node modules. When installing this module, npm only downloads an empty package into this folder. So if we look, if I can find, going from Mac to PC, I forget that you can't like just straight up open files from the sidebar here. Prisma starter. So if we go into the node modules here, we'll look at the Prisma client folder. So before we've even done anything, this package then gets, after we run this generate function, package gets filled with the actual library with the following command of the Prisma CLI. Package then filled. I wonder what actually gets written into this once we run npx prisma generate. Generator build. Wonder if it'll like create a folder or something. Scripts, backup index. Maybe client. What is this? So does this have anything related to like user? All entries from the user table. Oh, did it run after I... Oh, interesting. So it looks like this has like a post install hook that after, yeah, say post install. So after you install it, it automatically runs itself to fill this out. So that's why you can see here. So we've got like data for the users. We've got data for the posts. We got like post select, post. You can see in the, where'd it go? There was a list that I was looking at that had a lot of our data. Oh, I hit return. So you can see here, so we've got the author ID, content created at, the ID published, all of the columns within our tables were generated into this TypeScript definition file, which is pretty cool. So this is another thing where like this is thousands, almost 2,000 lines of TypeScript that it writes out for you in order to just like allow you to do queries and mutations and all of the CRUD stuff that you would generally have to kind of write yourself. Back when I was using Prisma 1, it had a similar way of doing this where it would help you by generating these files and stuff, but the way in which you actually leveraged these definitions was super convoluted and just didn't make sense to me. So this is just one file where it all exists, and you'll see how we leverage this file super simply in like plain English. It's really easy to use. So the developer experience of this is nice for sure. So cool. So we have installed it. It ran the post install hook, but we'll just follow the tutorials, run it again just to follow instructions. So it loads stuff from the environments variable. It generates the file that we just looked at, and then it shows you how you can start using the Prisma client to actually connect and do stuff with that data. Oops. Cool. So because the Prisma client node module is customized to your project, it is sometimes referred to as a smart node module. Then they kind of just go through and show you a traditional node module that has a bunch of stuff in the Lodash. They use Lodash as a conventional node module example. And then ours just downloads an empty stub and then generates stuff and puts it in this node module. So I have never used like a smart module like this before, so this was new to me when I was reading through this the first time. Is pretty interesting, and it makes a lot of sense too, because like generating all of this stuff and having it just sitting in like the root of your project could clutter things up quite a bit. And having, like with these projects, when you deploy this to a production server, the npm like those commands get run on the production server. So why not just have the production server generate this stuff and dump it into a node modules folder on the actual server? So it's a pretty interesting way of managing generated files like this. So pretty cool. Sweet. So now I think we're in a good spot to actually start writing a query. I need to run and use the restroom real quick, though. I will be back in 2 seconds. All right, we're back. Awesome. So cool. We're in good shape. We have everything set up. We can start actually communicating with our database and getting some data back. All right, cool. So now that we've generated our Prisma Client library, we can start writing queries to read and write data in our database. For the purpose of this guide, you'll use a plain node script to explore some basic features of the Prisma Client. Create a new file called index.ts and add the following code to it. Okay, cool. So let's touch index.ts just in the root, I imagine. This is the weird TypeScript-y bit that you'll see as you continue like exploring these docs and stuff. A lot of their examples or a lot of the other tooling that exists around Prisma ends up leveraging TypeScript. So TypeScript's kind of one of those things that just ends up getting added to this project. So it ends up getting peppered throughout, whether or not you like in your actual code, like once you start adding React and stuff into it, whether or not you want to leverage TypeScript is up to you. You can still create normal JavaScript files and not leverage TypeScript in like your components and stuff if you don't want to, which is probably what I'll end up doing because this is a personal project that only I will be touching for the most part. In the future, if more people touch it, then it might make sense to standardize around TypeScript or something like that. But for now, that's kind of beside the point. There's just like a forward thinking thing as you kind of move through using Prisma and stuff like that. So yeah, just an aside. Lovely. So let me go ahead and just move that a little bit so that we can see both. Cool. So we've got the index.ts. We can start writing stuff. So import Prisma Client from Prisma Client. So we've imported Prisma Client. We're going to create a new const and instantiate a new Prisma Client object function method. Const Prisma equals new Prisma Client, which is a method. Then we write an async function called main that we will eventually end up writing stuff in. And then at the bottom, we call main. We catch any errors and then throw them back if they exist. And then once everything is done, we async and disconnect Prisma, it looks like. So run an async function, await everything to be done, Prisma.disconnect. And that disconnects from Prisma. Okay. Nothing too crazy there. They run over pretty much what I just said. So we import Prisma Client, constructor, not method. That's what that's called. Import the Prisma Client constructor from the Prisma Client node module. Then we instantiate it. We define an async function called main to send queries to the database. That's this bit right here. And then we call the main function, we check for any errors, and then close the database connection once all of the scripts run and everything terminates. Cool, pretty straightforward. Inside the main function, add the following query to read all user records from the database and print the result. Excellent, okay. So within this async function, we set a const called all users, await prisma.user.find many, and then console.log all users. Struggling with the typing, const all users. Okay, cool. So this is one of the things that has helped me to actually understand how to work with Prisma in general, is this like super plain English find many. We pretty much just set this this method to a const and then log that const, and it will log out all of the records of user. So we could do this for literally anything. If we wanted to do const all posts, we could do await prisma dot posts dot find many, and it'll output all of the posts in the I think it's post. There you go. It will output all of the posts from the database. So this like plain English find many, you'll see further down there's things like create, update, delete, like just super easy methods to understand how to like interact with the data here. Yeah, this is just one of those things that kind of helped click in my brain how to actually work with this data. So yeah. So we've got our const, we've got our all users bit, and now we should be able to run npx ts node index.ts. And we get back an empty array, which is what we expect because we don't have any user records in the database yet. So far so good. Everything that we've written up to this point is in line with what it should be. So now we get to the point where we actually start writing data into the database. The find many query used in the previous section only reads data from the database, although it was still empty. In this section, you'll learn how to write a query to write new records to the post and user tables. So now, instead of the all users query here, which we're actually going to use. So I'll just leave at the bottom there. So in this main function, we will leverage the create method. So await prisma.user.create. And then within here, we are going to go into the data. And yeah, I guess just the way that this object is structured, or the way that this method accepts parameters or arguments or whatever for it, is just as an object. So we're creating an object called data, and within this data, then we're explaining the actual like information that we want to add to this user. So name is going to be Dom. Email is just going to be dom@dom.com for now. So one of the cool things too that you're able to do with this create method is actually like nest things that you want to create, right? So like if I wanted to create posts and a profile associated with this user that I'm adding at this particular moment, you can do that all through here. So you just essentially like end up chaining these create methods. And then you tell this, so within your post, we're going to create a post called hello world. I'm gonna divert a little bit from here, and let's see if we can do multiple of these. Create another post called title hello solar system. Although that probably doesn't make sense. We could probably just within here, if we organize this a little bit different, if we create multiple posts, another one with the title of hello solar system. What's this error getting? Object literal cannot have multiple properties with the same name. Okay. Can we create... I wonder if we need to... I'm just playing around here a little bit. Let's see what we can do. So if we wanted to create an array then of these posts. So we've got one object that has title hello world, then we've got another one that has title hello solar system. That's not giving me any errors. So let's see if we can create a couple posts for this user. And then after that, we're only going to create one profile and add the bio of space is neat. Look at that. Cool. So within this function, we have told Prisma to create a new user that has a name and an email address. We've drifted a little bit from the tutorial to see if we can add a couple posts to this user at the same time. And then we've told it to create a portfolio for this user and add spaces neat to their bio. That all follows there. Now we'll change the all users find many query to accept a couple of parameters. We're going to tell it to include all of the posts and the profile. This is essentially like telling it how far do we want to nest this query? Like what else do we want to show? So if there are associations on this query that we're making, do we want to list out those associations as well? So we've got that. Instead of the log, it's going to be a console dir all users. And then depth null. Missing letters. Depth null. Okay, so I think that all makes sense. Pretty much explaining the same thing. This code creates a new user record together with the new post and profile records using a nested write query. That's the cool bit. User record is connected to those two other ones via the post author and user's post and profile user profile relation fields that we created in the SQL database. Notice that you're passing the include option to find many, which tells Prisma Client to include the post and profile relations on the returned user objects. So more or less what we explained there. So we'll run the same npx command and see what I broke. I don't think I broke anything, which is potentially a first in history. It wrote the user. So we've got our email. It auto incremented the ID. It's got our name. And then we've got two posts associated with this user. We've got no content. It's got the created at. So these posts were created at exactly the same time because I chained them in there. They're both set to publish false by default. And we've got the proper titles. Each one has an auto incremented ID. And it just kind of works. So we have now written a super standard blog data structure, which is pretty cool. As someone who like doesn't work with data and stuff like this very often, the first time that I like actually got this to work and like have the relations actually like relate to one another and be able to query things based on, you know, the author, it is a good feeling as a front end dev, like trying to work with back end stuff. This structure and the way that this is all kind of laid out just really resonated with me and kind of helped me to be able to do this. So I'm super pumped about this. I think that is pretty neat that we were able to figure that all out. So cool. So we've got the output pretty much matching everything that they have in here. We've got the profile that has the bio ID and user ID. That's all looking solid. So the query added new records to the user and post tables, which we can actually look at in the PG admin. If we refresh this and I remember how to go into the, can I look at the properties, columns? That's no. If I do, there should be a view. Here we go. View all rows. In the post, you can see that we have our Hello World and Hello Solar System posts actually in our SQL database. So through this TypeScript, JavaScript, whatever, and Node, we actually wrote stuff to a database just by running a couple super simple, just, you know, what is that, 11 lines of JavaScript right there. That's pretty sweet. So we're actually writing to the database. We're able to create multiple instances of a piece of data associated with a user, and you're off and running. So one of the things here, note the numbers in the author ID column, post and user ID column on profile both reference the ID column of the user table. The ID value 1 column therefore refers to the first and only user record in the database. So essentially just saying that our relations are working for that author ID. So before moving on to the next section, we'll publish the post record we just created using an update query. So we're going to adjust the main function as follows. One of the things to note as you kind of keep going through these tutorials and stuff, make sure you like comment out this create. And what I like to do too, just for, my own reference as I comment some of these things out, especially like on a starter little thing like this, is just kind of describe what this thing did. So leverage Prisma create method to create a new user, associate posts and a profile to that user. Cool. This way, if we need this in the future, we just have it commented and not completely deleted, and it's easy to reference. Cool. So now we're going to update our post. So await prisma.post.update. So with this, we are updating a very particular post, which means we're going to have to give it a parameter telling it which post we want to update. So because we have two posts, we have an ID of 1, an ID of 2, because there's two posts. So let's tell it that we want to update post number 1. We'll just go with the example where post ID is equal to 1. And the update that we want to make is stored in the data object, and we're telling it that we want the published column to change to true from false. What did I mess up? Not assignable to parameter of type subset. Prisma.post. Oh, I need to set this to a const. So that was part of it. Where ID 1, comma date data is published true. Okay, excellent. And then we can comment out this all users query, although it'll essentially end up showing the same thing. I think, although because we're not running this, I don't think anything will show up. So just follow the example now. Console log that post that we have updated. So if we save that and run our node on that, we now have our hello world post set to publish true. So if we were to comment this out again and run the all users query, we should see that our user has two posts. The second post is still set to published false, while the first post is set to published true. So nice and easy way to update data here. So we'll add another comment to this. That is leverage the Prisma update method to select a specific post and change the published state. Awesome. Cool. So nice and easy updating. I assume we can kind of extrapolate this a little bit. So let's do const user equals await prisma.user.update. So if I wanted to like update my email address where the user ID is equal to 1, change the data of email to dom at doom.com. And then console log the user and get rid of this just to see what happens. So the user comes back with an email of the updated dom at doom.com. Oops, that is our SQL stuff. ID of 1, name of dom, so that all looks good. And then if we run the find all users query again, we should see that update. So yeah, nice and simple to extrapolate out to other pieces of your data. We could very easily do this for the solar system as well, but we can we'll move on to the next part of the tutorial just to keep things moving along. Awesome. So we just wrote some new data in our database, which is great. Next steps. This section lists a number of potential next steps you can take from here. Feel free to explore these or read the introduction. So they've got a few more examples of queries and stuff that we can run. So let's just run through those just to see what they've got. Let me write out a comment for this as well. Leverage a Prisma update method to select a specific user and change their ID. Awesome. Okay, let's look at some of these other examples that they have here. So you can do some filtering. So there's some parameters around the where object here that we can write to get posts that contain hello. We can extrapolate that to ours too, right? So let's do const find world. So we're only going to get posts that contain world in them, right? So wait, prisma.post.find many where, and then this is like it's like it's the same SQL relation keyword, right? So we're saying look in both the title and the content columns and find out if they contain the word world in our case, and if they do, then return them. So we don't have any content in our posts, which I suppose maybe we could take this one step further and do that first. So if we go back up to our specific post update method, let's change the content from null to, hey man, this is the world. Neat. So we're going to update our post ID of 1, which is hello world, and give it some content saying, hey man, this is the world, neat, and then log it. Cool. We've got content in there. Let's update the second post to say, hey man, this is the solar system. Wow. Very cool. And we'll run that same query again in PX. So we've got content in there. Excellent. Okay. Now we can comment that back out again so that we don't update our posts a second time. Re-comment that, and then where or is an array of options that we are comparing against, where the title contains world, or the content contains world. So now we've got a couple of parameters that we're searching for. We want to find any post that has the title containing world or the content containing world. One thing to keep in mind is that this is strict in that it will only search for the lowercase word world, not the uppercase. So because we have a post that has a title of hello capital W world, if we were to here's a better way to illustrate that actually. Let's update the second post to have the word I'm better than the capital W world. So we're going to insert the word world, but capitalized, into our second post that shouldn't have any instance of the word world in it. We'll update this. I'm not sure because I didn't have the console log out there if it did anything. Hey man, this is the solar system. I'm better than the capital W world. Oh, it's cool. I changed it to double quotes because I put a single quote in there, and it doesn't look like it actually broke anything, so that's cool. Let's see how that maintains. Okay, so now we're only looking for content that contains the lowercase version of this. So let's see what happens here. Console log find world. So you can see that we have found lowercase world in the content of the hello world title. If we were only looking for world as a title, we save that, it won't return anything. Case specific, keep that in mind. I'm sure there's like regexy ways to like potentially search for like W or W or something like that. I don't know how to write regex, but I'm sure that you could do it that way. Cool. So that's just kind of a nice way to filter based on some like data parameters and stuff here. So that's pretty cool. Okay. So we've got that. We could change this to like, ID. I wonder, actually, do they have, check out the API reference. Let's see if they, hello? Weird. Okay. I just want to know if there's any documentation around like the different parameters we can ask for. Because I guess if we're looking for a specific ID of something, we're not necessarily going to do a relation or like that or keyword. It's just going to be where ID is 2, right? And then we log it, and it should come back with the hello solar system. Yeah. Okay, so that makes sense. So if you need to find a specific post, yeah, nice and easy there. Okay, that makes sense. Let me undo that and put the 2 pieces there. We'll comment this out. Leverage find many to search title and content of post and get keyword. Nice. So that's pretty straightforward. The next one, create a new post record and connect it to an existing user record. Okay, so this is a good way for us to be able to do a different, like a more of a one-way relationship, right? Where we want to create post, await Prisma post, create, and we want to be able to associate that to an author. So we're going to do the same thing where we did data. We'll set the title to hello Galaxy. We can set the content here if we want to I am the big bad galaxy. Hello. And then publish is going to be false by default, and then we need to connect the author. So because the post data contains what we wrote out here in our schema for author instead of user, this is how we connect the user ID. So we need to reference author instead of like user or anything like that. So author. And then this is where the connect property comes in. And based on this example, apparently we can connect this author through any, well, can we do it through any like data piece? So like we have an email, which is unique, and we know it's unique, and then an ID. So I imagine that we could do it by either of these things, not necessarily just the unique email. I guess let's find out. So instead of using email, let's just use ID 1. Missing a comma. So we'll connect based on the user ID instead of the email and see what that does for us. Console.log create post. Author ID 1. Okay, cool. That makes sense. I mean, the ID is always going to be unique because auto increments, and the email is always going to be unique because we've set it as a constraint on the user. So we can do that either way. So let's do email for example's sake. dom@doom.com. Hello galaxy, hello universe. Everything. Or I am everything. Based on the email, hello universe, content, cool. Do the same thing. And now if we look at our user again, do our all users query, save that. We can look at the many posts that we have created, all associated with this one user. So all these author IDs are the same, regardless of how we added it. They've all got auto-incremented IDs. They're all not published. We've got different titles. Yeah. So this is a nice, easy way to start adding data. Okay, cool. So the next one, use the Fluent Relations API to retrieve the post records of a user by traversing relations. I feel like that sentence was longer than the JavaScript I have to write to do whatever it is they're talking about here. Const posts equals await Prisma. So we're querying the profile of a single user. Find one. So we find the one profile where the user's ID is 1, and then traverse user posts. I'm missing something. Find one where, because where is inside, and then we're just chaining a couple of methods onto this one, I guess. And then I guess just tell me what that is. Const posts, or oops, console.log posts. Oh, I closed out. There it is. Run the node. So what did that return us? This returned oh, I see. Okay. So this, we're essentially chaining what we want returned based off of this find one. So once we get the user's profile whose ID is 1, then go into that user and then go into those posts and then return those posts. So we're just chaining those methods out to tell it what we want actually returned. That's interesting. So there are different ways for you to query data and return associated data from that piece that you get. That's pretty cool. Awesome. Okay. I'm going to comment this out. Retrieve specific data from a related field. Get posts based on user profile data. I guess that's kind of the explanation for it, more or less. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. The last one, delete a user record. We're not going to delete ours because we only have one, but what we could do is just go all the way up to the top. Prisma user create. Yeah, we'll just do delete me. Delete at delete.com. Hello, delete. Goodbye. This is actually interesting. Let's see if it removes all of the posts in the profile associated with this user too. I am delete. Okay, so we'll save that. This is just going to run, and then I can query our all users after I run it. So we've got Dom as user ID 1, and then we've got delete as user ID 2 with a couple of posts associated to this user and a profile. So now if we get rid of that and try, we'll scroll right to, well, we'll go to the bottom. Move that, and we'll do const delete user. Oh, wait, prisma.user.delete, where we'll just go with the ID equals 2. And then log the deleted user. Is that even going to return anything? Invalid Prisma user delete because they have posts associated with them. The change you're trying to make would violate the required relation post to user between the post and user models. Interesting. So is there a way to like delete the relations? I wonder. Prisma delete with relations. This is Prisma 1. Let's look for Prisma 2. Delete with relations. This is Prisma 1 again. Delete many. Here you go. So this guy's got 2 models. Delete does not delete relations, even when using relation on delete cascade. Feature waiting, but unless I'm missing something obvious, the Prisma 2 type system makes working around this problem inefficient. Essentially, I need to do the following. Find one. Delete many. You need to pass in the related object. Is there a solution anywhere in here? This is, okay, so delete does not delete relations even when using on delete cascade. This is expected right now as cascade deletes are not implemented. Right now you can manually edit the schema and set the cascade behavior to work around this. That's a little bit interesting. I guess that's what you get with something that is in beta. So please try the second query again. Make sure you're properly awaiting the promises as pointed out. If this is resolved, we can close this as a duplicate. Interesting. Prisma 2 cascade delete. This is just, I think this is version 1 documentation. Let's search the docs for Cascade, since that seems to be the term. Cascading deletes Postgres. Oh, interesting. Okay, so there's a whole page dedicated to this. This page explains how to configure cascading deletes on foreign key constraints in Postgres. So apparently this is like a MySQL thing that we have to leverage. So this is going through creating an entire new database in project. So we'll just skip that. So we've got create 2 tables with a foreign key and restrict deletion behavior. In this section, you'll create 2 tables where one references the other via foreign key and uses restrict in the cascading deletes demo database. You just created 2 tables called user and post. The post table references the user table via the foreign key defined. The deletion behavior restrict in this case means that it is not possible to delete a user record that is referenced. That is a referenced user record. If you try doing that, the database will throw an error. Okay. Okay, so this one is telling us if you want to restrict deletion, which seems like that's what the default is, right? So instead of restrict, what is this constraint actually? Let's look at our schema. What is constraint? Foreign key constraints. So we've got a foreign key. Where is constraint? A foreign key constraint specifies that the values in a column or group must match the values appearing in some row of another table. We say this maintains referential integrity between 2 related tables. Okay, so this, I guess, constraint isn't a necessary keyword here, right? Constraint author foreign key references public user ID. Interesting. So the annoying thing here is going to be that in order for us to, this is kind of one of those things too, that when you're working with data like this and you kind of need to adjust your schema, you have to go into your tables. Let's just do this so you can see. If we, where do I do this? I want to drop these tables and just delete all of it. Why can't I just delete you? Back up, delete, drop. I guess you just do it. What if I drop the post table first, and then the profile table next, and then the user last? Okay, excellent. So now we have no database at all. If I change this to match their documentation here and just do on delete cascade, well, let's see. So create table, public, post, author ID. So if I delete the user, is this saying that, I guess here, let's find out. Okay. Just on delete cascade. On delete cascade. We'll save that, copy this, and put it back into our, what is this called again? The query tool. And run that. And then go back into our index. I'm going to recreate our, let's see, actually, can I just, well, here, yeah, let's do this. Copy that and paste it for our first user, who was me. And we'll do dom. And we'll just do dom. dom.com. Hello world. Hello solar system. And create that. Let's play around a little bit. I want to create 2 users at one time. Data. Oops, I put that in the wrong place. So an array. Where the first guy is me and the second user is going to be who we want to delete. So we'll do delete and then delete. Hello, delete. And delete me. Property data, property email is missing in type. What did I screw up there? Would this... does this array have to be outside of data? Well, that's even more broken. Where was our posts that we created multiple of? Oh, it was here. So create prisma.user.create data. Property email is missing in type. So it's not liking that this is in an array. Interesting. I wonder. I think I just tried. Oh, did I actually? Hold on. Hold up. So we got data with an object in here. We got another object, and then we're closing the array. Okay, so it seems like, let me actually just copy this real quick just so I have it. And then delete this. Get rid of the array on data. So this is totally valid. It seems like we should be able to do this, right? Why is that freaking out? Property data is missing in type. Okay. Well, maybe we won't screw around with that then. So let's just create our one user, and then where's our console.dir? There we go. So we will save that. We'll create just one user. Let me refresh my tables and make sure that they're in there fine. Post profile user, great. Run the node. I broke something naturally. Oh, did I not comment out? Oops. Try that again. Oh, did it already? It probably already tried to create that user because that ran. So if we just log out the users, we should be fine. Cool. Okay, so we have our one user. Let me create our second user by changing the data to the delete data, which I think that I copied. Did I not? It's all name DOM, await Prisma create data, user name delete me. There it is. Data, delete me, delete, yep, create, and then log it out. Awesome, so we've got our two users. All right, all that to see if we can delete that user. Comment that out. So we'll delete user 2. I bet she's going to have a problem with the profile now, right? Request. Oh boy. Error for binding 0. Record not found. Record to delete does not exist. Prisma user delete 2. Posts delete me. Oh, interesting. Did it try to auto increment on that broken query? That's bizarre. It must have. All right, let's try 3. The change you're trying to make would violate the relation post to user between the post and user model. Huh. Well, that's obnoxious. On delete cascade. No action delete behavior. The foreign key and set null deletion behavior. Set default, introspect. Oh, because we changed the SQL, let's see if we have to do npx introspect and then a generate. Npx Prisma introspect. So that'll write to our schema.prisma. And I mean, did that change how posts? No, it didn't do anything. So I mean, this changed. It generated the file properly, so we need to change that to author. We need to change this to user. We need to change this to posts and profile. But it doesn't look like it actually did anything here. Npx Prisma generate. Regenerated everything. Now if we do, what was it? Npx TS node. It's going to come back with the same thing. Yeah. That's bizarre. It might actually be something I have to look into a little bit more. It's like, how do you have that delete cascade down to all of the things that are associated with that user? It seems like you'd probably have to write some logic around this to be like, okay, if you're deleting a user that has posts, first assign those posts to another user, and then delete. Interesting. I'll play around with that some more. That's probably outside the scope of this. I took us on a little bit of a tangent there, so sorry about that. But interesting to know. Okay, so I mean, we can probably just adjust this to be like Prisma post delete where ID equals 3. So if we look up in our log at post IDs, that's going to be one of delete's posts there. So delete post, save that, and then run it and see what happens. Okay, and then if we we will just do our console dir all users and just see if that actually deleted it from that user. So now delete only has ID of 4 posts. He's got 1 post rather than 2. That's great. So now we can do the same thing where ID is equal to 4. So that should delete all of the posts. And then if we comment that out, the delete user should now have no posts. And now I wonder if we are able to prisma.user.delete where ID is equal to 3. Delete user. We'll take the long way out here between profile and user. Okay, prisma.profile delete where can we do kind of that similar thing where do we need to do that? So if we look at the user's profile, it has an ID of 2. So we'll just delete user profile where ID is 2. And then save this, just output the users again. That user should now have no profile. And now, this is the ultra long way out here. User, where ID 3. Now that user has no relations at all. We should be able to delete that user. Excellent. Now all that's left is DOM. Wow. The longest way out. But there you go. We got it. Cool. So we deleted the user record. I probably should have brought this up before I started going down these rabbit holes. There's a nice another easy way to kind of like interact with the data in the database. Back when I was using Prisma 1, the way that you interacted with the data was on like a Prisma server, and it had like this whole big like GUI that you would be able to use to like see all of the data that you have in your database, but in like a Prisma, like GraphQL kind of context. So like showing the relations, and it's a little bit easier to navigate than Postgres. You can't run, I don't think you can run any queries and stuff in there, but in any case, let's run this command here. This is the experimental flag thing that I was talking about like at the very beginning of the stream, which at this point was like 2 hours ago. So sorry about that. But if we run npx Prisma Studio, I'm going to do experimental. Experimental. What this is going to do is essentially open up that same GUI. So now we just have like a super stripped down version of our database. So on the left-hand side here, you can see your users. Your user has a post relation. If you double click on that, it pulls up the posts associated with that user. Same thing with a profile. I think you can add different tabs here to show just different parts so that you can switch back and forth between your data. Interesting. So now I want to try something here. There's this add record button that I've never used before, which, ooh, okay. This author ID is read only. So how would I, associate. Oh, okay. So this is legitimately a GUI for adding records. So hello Galaxy, We can set publish to true. This is auto incremented. The content we can change to wow, whoa, cool galaxy, man. And then if we hit save changes, and then I try and run our users query, is that going to give us that third post? It is. Publish true, ID 5. That's pretty neat. So yeah, this what the hell is this called? This Prisma Studio thing is just a GUI way to interact with the SQL data. So it obviously still wrote to our post columns. So if we went to look in our actual database and view, where's view? Where did I see view? Can't remember if I refresh it maybe. View, edit data, all rows. We now have that third post with an ID of 5. It's got the content in there, so it actually writes from Prisma Studio into the database. Neat. Cool. So then the last little section that they have here is just about like creating more tables and relations and stuff like that. To evolve the app, you need to follow the same flow of the tutorial. Manually adjust your database schema using SQL, re-introspect, reconfigure the client API, and then regenerate the Prism client. And that capitalization stuff, I think, is that step 3 there, where you change the names of your model. Cool. So yeah, that's gonna wrap up our kind of just initial dive into Prisma. I'm definitely gonna take this and evolve it a little bit. So like I have the data structure figured out for this little side project that I've been working on. My next step now is to figure out how to properly set up the connection between the front end and the back end to actually like display this data and read it, and then have React interact with Prisma. I'm still kind of in the middle of trying to figure all of that out, but once I get that squared away, then I'll schedule another stream. I'll try and do this next week at the very least. If I don't have this figured out by next week, I'll at the very least do like some kind of just open office hours thing where if you want to just come out and hang out and talk about development stuff, that would be cool. And we could just, talk about whatever, not really have a plan. So I'm going to keep at least, it's either going to be Tuesdays or Wednesdays. It'll kind of be fluid from week to week. But one of those days we'll hang out and either do something development or just talk about stuff, or if no one feels like hanging out, I'll just sit on the stream and do something until someone wants to come in and chat about something. So we'll figure that out next week, but either next Tuesday or Wednesday, look out for that. In any case, though, I appreciate y'all hanging out. Prisma's pretty cool. Data structure is hard. Back-end people who do this on a daily basis, I commend you. I have no idea how you'd be able to spend like all day doing this, but good for you for doing that, because without you, I wouldn't have a way to interact with data and do my job. So yeah, in any case, thanks for hanging out, and I hope you have a great week. Talk to you later. Bye, everyone.